Hello, everyone. I'm Becky Goldsmith, and thank you for taking a time out with me today. I right before I turned this on, I was fooling with the lights, trying to get it right. I hope I'm good. Um, behind me is the anniversary quilt. Um, it's from the book Flowering Favorites, which is out of print, but it's currently available as a print on demand or as an ebook. And the funny thing is, I found this quilt, it was rolled up in the closet where it kind of lives, when I was looking for something to put behind me, and I hadn't had it out in a long time, and I pulled it out. And I swear to you, later that day, this was yesterday, Steve said to me, "Did you remember that our anniversary is this week?" And I had to admit I didn't, because dates, I don't keep up with them so much. But yes, our anniversary is tomorrow. We will have been married 43 years tomorrow. Yay us. Okay, and this is the quilt I made to celebrate our 20th anniversary. I thought it would go on the bed. It's never really gone on the bed because we've always had cats. And I just can't commit to an applique quilt on the bed with the cats, but maybe later. Or Lorna is going to maybe hang it on the wall in their bedroom, which would also be good. Okay, so that was like way to the side. What I am talking to you about today, oh, look, there it is again. I wonder if I can take that off. Yes, I can. What I'm going to talk to you about today is how to mark a quilt top. And I've made some videos and I've got some other stuff to show you in between. Where I am going to start is with what I learned back in the day. So this is old school. This is old school quilt marking. This is part of a quilt that I made almost 30 years ago. This part is unquilted, and I marked this with graphite. It would have been one of the mechanical quilter's pencils that were available 30 years ago, and there was one. It was black. I can picture it. I just can't remember what it was called. I think the lead then is pretty much the same as the lead graphite that you would find in a quilter's pencil today. I marked this before I basted it with a ruler. Other parts of this quilt, and I'll show you that in a minute, I marked with a stencil, I'm sure. The reason you want to mark before you layer and baste is because, especially with something like this, if you're trying to mark and the batt gives way underneath, you won't get nice straight lines. I want you to notice that you can see the lines. They are neither really dark nor really light. And there are places like this where I got off the ruler where, it made a mark. And you can tell I didn't try to erase that back in the day, and I don't know that I would now. Next, I want to show you what this looks like quilted. The unquilted blocks that I just showed you were part of a giant bed-size quilt. And I had quilted the center of the quilt, and I decided I would never use it on a bed. So I took the center out and bound it, and this is now a small quilt. And I've got the larger pieces set together. All I'm short is one block of some sort that I'll put in the middle that would be this size, and then I can quilt the other larger piece. I don't know when I'm going to get to this. It took me 30 years to get this far. So you can see where I have quilted this quilt, that like right here, there's still a little bit of the line visible. And every now and then, if you look close, you can see shadows of that graphite, like right here. That doesn't bother me at all. When I did the quilting, a lot of that graphite just sort of went away. And this has been folded in my closet for years with no wear. I'm assuming that as I use this quilt, a lot of that graphite will just sort of go away.
would I take an eraser to these lines? So, for example, this line right here where the graphite is visible. If I were going to take an eraser to it, it would be this one. And while it's a little bit dirty here on the edge from being in my drawer, I've cleaned up that edge. Let's see here. I could take the eraser to it, but the thing you want to watch anytime you use an eraser on the cloth is that you don't scuff up the cloth so much that it's more obvious than it was before. I think that took off a little bit of the graphite. Yeah, it did. It took a little bit off. I don't feel strongly enough about it to do more than that. This line where I overshot the stencil, I could use the eraser on it and it might knock it back a little bit more. But honestly, it doesn't bother me enough to do more than that. It might bother you a lot more, in which case you would be more careful when you did your marking, right? So this is a nice example of graphite used with a light hand on a very light fabric and hand quilting. If you stay on the line, machine quilting might hide it even better than hand quilting.
So I still like old school markers personally, and you'll see more why. But graphite and white chalk are my preferred marking tools. There's more. Oh, there's so much more. Okay, I'm going to show you the next thing that helps to explain why I don't promote colored markers at all for a quilt.
I want to share with you some close-ups of Welcome to the North Pole. This quilt is almost 25 years old. And back in the day, I would do things like I did here, where I followed a weave in the fabric in this print for my quilting lines where I didn't mark. But then there were other areas where I did mark. I learned a lot on this quilt. The pencil on some of the fabrics still really shows. And I'm not positive, but I suspect that this is either a silver pencil, because those silver pencils, they were around back in the day, or it's a white pencil that has a lot more binder in it than the pencils that I use now. I believe if I had used either one of the either Soline or Bowen, or there's other companies that come with these 9mm wide ceramic white chalks. We didn't have those back in the day. If I had used this, the line would be finer. Or if I had used the charcoal pencil, sharpened to a finer point than I typically do, used very lightly, I don't think it would show as much as this does here. So now that you know what you're looking at, you can see hints of that white chalk around. Maybe it bothers you more than it bothers me, because it really doesn't bother me. But I'll show you what does bother me. On this block at the bottom, even from a distance, you can see how yellow it is. And let me zoom in a little bit more. See that yellow? I know what I did. I was trying to mark this. Silver wouldn't have shown, graphite wouldn't have shown, white chalk wouldn't have shown. So I picked up a yellow pencil and I marked that. And thankfully, I realized pretty quick that that was a bad move, because I didn't mark any of the other blocks with yellow, and I don't know that I have used a yellow pink, or blue chalk pencil since I made these marks, because even though you can see whatever this is, the white or the silver, and even though in the other quilts I've shown you that I marked with graphite, every now and then you can see the graphite, to me they don't bother me, but that bothers me a lot. We all have to decide when we're marking quilts what our tolerance level is going to be. This block defined my tolerance level.
So, as I said, I'm pretty old school. I don't like or recommend colored pencils to use to mark quilting lines because they bother me. You have to decide what bothers you. When I'm marking, this is what I use right here. I either use the Palomino Blackwing, the 602, the extra firm, the natural is just as good to use on marking. Or I use the General's charcoal pencil in white, because for a white chalk pencil, it's pretty soft. It goes away pretty quick. Or I use either the graphite or the white ceramic leads inside either a sew line or a Bowen or one of those mechanical pencils. I've got that pencil sharpener out there because it's the one that does the extra long fine point. I've shown you that in a previous time out. All right, what else might you like? If you don't like those, what else might work? These are from Clover. These are tubes that have powdered chalk, so there's no binder in the chalk. And when I say binder, it's like there's the powder. Something has to bind the powder together to go into a pencil so that the powder doesn't fall out of the inside of your pencil, right? So this is just the powdered chalk. They come in yellow, white, blue, and pink. In this, I would only use the white. And it's fun. So there's the little ones, and you can get refills for the tubes. There's also a bigger pencil that a bigger thing that works the same way as the short one. It's got this little wheel and you put it on. The thing about using these is that the powder is so powdery that it brushes away really fast. So you would not want to mark a whole quilt top and then start handling it. This is one of those maybe mark it a little more as you go kind of things, but it's an option. Then there's stencils. Now, I've talked to you last week. I talked about planning your quilting just a little bit when I talked to you about Quilt as Desired. And I think I showed you stencils. So stencils are nice when you want to find a design and use it more than once and you don't want to draw it yourself. And you can adapt stencils, you can combine them, you can use them in bits and pieces. And usually with a stencil, the groove is big enough that you could use the graphite or the chalk pencil or lots of other things. But I wanted to show you this thing. This is another one, and this is one where I Googled pounce or ponce. A quilt pounce or ponce used to be like could you use muslin? You could use muslin or cheesecloth, and you could put powdered chalk in it, and you could hold that over a stencil and pound it down, and the powder would go through the stencil onto your fabric. Now, there is one of these that's been on the market, and they make special stencils that are pretty interesting. They've got a swipe it on, iron it off powder. It works. It works really well. I would not recommend let me just say this. I would not personally iron it off. I would wash it out. It washes out, or brush it off. Those things, marking tools that you iron to make disappear make me extraordinarily nervous, because it's not like the iron makes the chemical disappear, to my knowledge. It just puts it in there and makes it not visible. And it's rare and it's anecdotal. I've never done it myself, and I've not had it happen with that particular tool. But I have heard people say that some of those things that you iron to make disappear, sometimes the line comes back. I'm not a fan of that. And in general, any of these tools, the ones I use, the ones you might use, if you heat set, like if you iron the graphite or the charcoal pencil or any of those, if you iron them into your fabric, they are going to be hard to remove, possibly impossible to remove. So be careful how you handle a quilt that you've marked. And if you happen to be traveling or going to Stitch Group with a marked quilt in your car in the summertime, and you stop somewhere and you park it and leave it in the car with the windows up in the summer heat, be real careful, because even that could heat set lines into your quilt. All right, let's see here. What's the next thing I was going to talk to you about? Oh, I know. What's even better. So I'm talking to you about how to mark your quilt and some of the tools you might use, but even better is not marking your quilt at all. There are a variety, well, there's at least 2 tools I can think of, and I've got a video to show you for both of them. Here's one.
This is a Hera. This one in particular is made by Clover. It's hard plastic, has a nice handle, and it has a not knife sharp, but sharp edge right there. And when you hold it in your hand, your finger naturally goes there to help you grip and push. This is a tool to make a line on your quilt. It doesn't leave an actual line, it leaves an indentation in the fabric. I have only used a Hera on a quilt that has already been basted, so that there's a little bit of give. And I did actually use it on this quilt. This is Pushing Boundaries, and it's hand quilted in a very loose fashion. I didn't want to use a ruler. I drew in by hand the lines that I quilted into the background. And if they got a little bit off, I just didn't care. And the way it worked, I would have my sandboard in my lap. I placed the quilt on it, and I didn't draw more than just a little bit at a time. And I'll go ahead and draw one of these. And I'm not even sure you'll be able to tell that it makes a crease, but you push the Hera down and you crease. Yes, I think you can see right there, there's a crease. And what it would do for me, if it's laying flat with the light on it directly, you can't see the creases well. But if you've got it up in your hand, the indentation of the line, there's a shadow on one side or the other. So I was able to use this, and I think there were even times where my quilt was hooped and I would draw a line with it. I would not mark a whole quilt in advance with the Hera, because I don't know how long the creases will stay in the fabric. So I view this more as a mark as you go kind of tool that doesn't leave an actual mark. It makes a temporary crease that is handy when that's what you need.
So, as I said, I haven't tried marking a whole lot in advance with the Hera, so I don't know for positive sure how long that mark lasts. And I suspect it would make a line with just, with just fabric without batting underneath it. So if you had your fabric on a harder surface or on a rotary mat or something, it would probably also make a line. I just don't know how long it stays. And I don't have anything I want to mark enough lines that I might want them to go away to test that. If any of you guys do, let me know. Then there's tape. Tape is a good option. Let's look at this.
This is a section of the hand sewing adventure, which is the quilt that's in my book, Hand Sewing. As I film this, the book isn't quite out yet, but it's coming soon. What's nice about this is I hardly had to mark anything. I didn't want it too heavily quilted. I was able to quilt in the ditch and around the applique most of the time. But there are a few places where I wanted to do lines that I wasn't following anything in particular. In this block, I wanted to quilt lines that were parallel to the seam lines. I didn't want to mark it with a pencil, mostly because I was lazy and I didn't want to pull out the ruler. The Hera would not have shown up well on this fabric, so I decided to use tape. And you can get different widths of tape designed to mark quilting lines. I don't have any myself, but what I used here is washi tape. This is some of my decorative Christmas tape. It's not real sticky. I think it's about 1/2 inch wide. You stick it down, quilt almost next to it. If you get too close, your needle gets gummy. Never leave the tape on the quilt in between quilting sessions. Put the tape down, do your quilting, remove the tape. Washi tape is not particularly sticky. As it picks up fibers, it will stop sticking as well, and then you just throw that away and get some more. You could use painter's tape if you wanted wider grooves. You can also use maker's tape. And what's nice about this is that it has little bubbles or something on it so that you can tear it straight, or more or less straight, pretty easily. It's more sticky than the washi tape, so you might get more uses out of it. But again, don't leave tape on your quilt for extended periods of time. Tape is kind of precise, but I don't know that it's all the way super precise. If you were doing a big grid or channel quilting and using tape, every now and then it would make sense to use a ruler to make sure that you're not getting off and starting to wander in a weird direction. Could you use tape for machine quilting? I think you could. I don't see why you couldn't. I haven't done that in a long time. If any of you try it, let me know how it goes.
Okay, this is a detail of the quilt behind me. And I wanted to give you a chance to look at it because I've talked about free motion quilting, and in my view, other people may do free motion quilting. Well, I'm sure they do. In my view, when I free motion quilt, I like to do it without marks. So free motion means that you've got a darning foot on your quilt, on your sewing machine, and you actively move the quilt under the needle. The presser foot and feed dogs do not move the quilt for you, right? So you are using your hands or a standing machine, a long arm machine, to move the needle. When I free motion quilt, I do it without lines because I have a real hard time following the lines. If you are more careful or more skilled, you might want to draw your free motion design on the fabric and follow that. I just don't have any luck with it. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you here, this is a quilt that I machine quilted inside the applique and hand quilted the background. So where the fabric, where I was sewing along lines and didn't necessarily need to draw on the background fabric, I didn't. But here, where there's so much diagonal, or where over in the border to the left of the screen, I had to draw lines on the fabric there. And I think most of the time I actually did draw. I might have combined drawing the occasional line with some tape. When I quilt an applique, when I quilt any quilt, I do my best to find ways not to mark. So I'm going to go back one. I had to mark the lines, but I didn't have to use a marker inside the applique. All right, now as you look at this next video clip, now that you've had an idea, now that you've looked a little bit at details of the quilting, as I'm talking about one thing, maybe also notice the quilting that's going on around it.
This is the quilt that's hanging on the wall behind me. I put a wool bat in this back when wool bats were a brand new thing. I hand quilted the background, but did machine quilting inside the applique. I did not mark inside the applique. That was all free motion. I did mark with a graphite pencil the lines in the background because it was easier to mark it than it was to use tape. And what's nice about this is that because the backgrounds are busier and a little bit darker, and because the thread I used is also darker, you can tell how much the graphite doesn't show. On this quilt, mostly I marked it accurately and I sewed on the lines, but there are the occasional places like this where I drew a line that was wrong, I redrew it, I quilted, and I left that line. There's a part of me that sees that as the tracks of where I've been. It relates to the experience of making this by hand and marking it by hand and hand quilting it by hand. It shows a person did this, a fallible person. That would be me. And I'm okay with that.
So you can tell, I mean, I've shown you some close-ups. You can tell that while I do my best to mark a quilt accurately, and so that if the lines show, they don't overpower, or draw attention to themselves in the overall quilt. But in general, I view marking a quilt when you have to as one of those things you just have to do. And so if sometimes the line shows, that's okay. You do the best you can. Now that's definitely my opinion, and you might disagree with me totally. But I did want to tell you what I thought. I wanted to share with you what I know about marking quilts. There's lots more. I'm sure I could go on for another hour, especially if I was seeing, lots of questions. Lorna's dealing with that side. But this gives you, for those of you who haven't maybe marked quilts before, I think this gives you a nice jumping off place to go out and start doing it. So thank you for joining me. And I do believe I'm right at 30 minutes. That's pretty good. I'm pretty happy about that, because we all have, we've got 30 minutes of time out, and then we need to be done and move on with the day, right? So there's my email address, becky.piececake@gmail.com. Please do let me know if there is something you'd like me to talk about. I've got a list going. And what's the other thing? There's the other thing. I'll see you next Wednesday at 2 o'clock. And I think I'm going to talk about the two products that I know for sure of that work for preparing circles in advance for applique, whether for hand applique or for needle or for machine applique. So I think I'm going to make a commitment. I think next week we're going to hear about circles. So thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next week. And until then, may you have many happy stitches.